really lovely to meet you last night. I just wanted to let you know I thought over what you said, and you were right, and I was wrong, and hope to see you around. And I think that was the last time I said anything publicly really homophobic. Good job.
Good job indeed.
But I think that tendency to turn away. I have a friend in New York who said to me recently she felt like she had an obligation to never speak to anyone in her office who voted for Trump. And I felt like, you've got it right, except for the never part. It should be always. You should be always speaking to the people that you disagree with, and not to shout at them. But I think that idea of engaging and that people have value, even when that value is not apparent to you. People have worth, and they deserve to be treated a certain way. And I think, even when they have bigoted views, I think treating someone with more generosity than they're treating whatever group they're being biased against is a way of showing people, look, this is what dialogue is like, this is what respect is like. And for me, it's the thing that would really start to change my mind about things I needed to change my mind about.
You have, since your book appeared at the top of President Obama's summer reading list, I'm sure that you've spent plenty of time in milieus like this one, in rooms like this one. What do you think is most misunderstood about the world you came from in a context like this?
In the context of the book or outside? That's interesting. I think people always want to caricaturize people. And we take a really simplistic view of someone and we think, well, we know what that is. And our brains are kind of wired to operate in caricatures, actually. And it's something we have to really resist. And I think my parents fit a certain stereotype really, really well. And there's a serious risk of them being reduced to that. I wanted to write a book that I wanted to counter that. These are fully complicated human beings, and I wanted to tell a story where they were fully complicated human beings.
Yeah. What advice would you bring to someone who is trying to navigate trying to cross someone else's reality, even in just having that conversation, in just trying to get someone else's perspective? How do you approach it? How do you do it?
I think humility is the secret to most things, and most things having to do with respect and education. I think if you are someone who was raised and you were given a good education and you were exposed to ideas and you were exposed to the world, I think education should never be a stick that you use to beat other people into submission. It should never be a source of arrogance. It should always be something that makes you want to learn more about a person and not just tell them more things. So I think education, as much as we can associate education with inquiry and not just with knowing, with already having all the answers, but I really think it's humility and trying not to be so arrogant that we alienate people with our knowledge, but that we just show people knowledge is actually really wonderful and exciting, and it's discovery, and it's great. It's not a weapon. It's an experience, and we all should share it.
Well, we have left the audience hopefully happily unspoiled for many of the actual stories in this very good memoir. So Tara Westover, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks to all of you.
Please welcome Kellyanne Conway, Counselor to the President, here with Steve Clemens, The Atlantic's Washington editor-at-large.
Hey everybody, are you having a good festival? Have a seat, Kellyanne. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Oh, wow. You guys have no idea how comfortable these couches are. I'm going to get very comfortable. Thank you for joining us. So much to talk about. It's a wild week, wild time. Let me just get to it. You made the decision to reveal some very deeply personal issues about a sexual assault that had happened in your past, and I know that this is a big issue, and I'm just wondering, in this time, the frame that you've shared, how does that change the way you look at the dynamics of what we're dealing with every day right now around the Kavanaugh hearings?
Steve, first of all, thank you for having me to the Atlantic Festival. Greetings to those few of you who clapped and those who didn't. Revealing of yourself, not of me. That's okay.
We're very happy you're
I love
here.
all people. I don't know what's got everybody so unhappy in the country. So I didn't make a decision to reveal that. That just sort of happened. I think had I made a decision, I would have articulated it better, but I don't plan to speak any further about it. I can just tell you that that was newly revealed publicly, but not new or newly revealed where it matters. And that, as I said during the same TV appearance, I'll repeat myself, I have great empathy for victims of sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape, and the like, and that I wanted everybody to hear the full sentence. I didn't say, I'm a victim of sexual assault and leave it there. I said, but I don't hold responsible Brett Kavanaugh or Jake Tapper, who happened to be sitting there, or Jeff Flake, the senator who asked for the FBI. I don't hold anybody responsible. The people who should be held responsible are the perpetrators. And I think we're at a time when we are conflating too many things all at once because we are at several cultural moments all together. And the second point I was trying to make, that I'll make again today here, is we can't judge people's harm or grief or impact or experiences based on their politics. Because I work for President Trump, I'm any less harmed because Brett Kavanaugh was nominated by President Trump. The claim that he is denied is true is any more true. You have to really think through that, because when people look through their partisan lenses at fundamentally non-political, non-partisan issues, that I think is where the trouble begins. And I happen to work in the White House on any number of issues, but several of them that I can legitimately say are nonpartisan issues, striving for and increasingly finding bipartisan solutions.
I know that you, just by nature of fact, are one of the best pollsters in the country because you saw things about Donald Trump and the hidden Trump voter before anyone else did. I wonder, before we leave this subject, if you see something different about this time. Earlier, Jeff Goldberg asked Hillary Clinton whether she saw this as a time of a beginning battle between the genders. And her response was not quite there, but there may be different things going on. How do you, from your experience and looking at where you are in the White House, do you sense something, an inflection point about women's rights and women's place in our society?
Well, in 2016, I think many women in the country decided that they would like to, or men and women would like to vote for a female president someday, just not that one at that time. And many women said, she shares my gender, but maybe she doesn't share my position on the issues or my values or my vision for America. So that was a very big gender moment in this country, to have a majority of the electorate be female, and for a very prominent 110% name identification, I would think, a woman who had been Secretary of State, United States Senator, First Lady of Arkansas, First Lady of the country, to not prevail in the election. So I think there were other questions about gender and women that go right to the heart of why I work in this White House and continue to, even though a lot of the men are gone. And some are still there.
Any more about to leave?
Oh, I have no idea. You'd have to ask them. I don't pay much attention to that. Same thing with, well, I won't go there, but all I'll say is that I have to look at the way women are helped or harmed by policies as well, and this is why I'm in the White House. I never thought I'd be in public service at this age or stage in my life, but for me, it does matter that we got a new trade deal yesterday. It matters tremendously because I grew up with the forgotten man or forgotten woman. I consider me among them as a matter of my birth and my childhood and my upbringing. This will help people who are in manufacturing or in farming. I worked on a farm for 8 summers myself. It will help people in the dairy farms. It will help folks. I think it's a modernized version of previous trade agreements, and a better one, frankly. And without getting too far into those details, when I travel across the country working on the opioid and drug crisis, I have no idea what people's politics are. I don't even know if they're registered to vote, let alone if they bother to, how they voted, if they plan to in the future. When you see people in need like that, Steve, when you see them truly physically and emotionally suffering, I feel like voting is the last thing on their mind. But I have to make good on the promise that President-elect Trump made to the country in those wee hours on November 9th. which is that he would be the president for all Americans, including those who didn't support him. And he said, he looked up and ad-libbed, and there's more than a few of you. So we have to make good on that every day. That's what public service entails. And I'm happy to report on that particular issue, which takes up a little bit of my time each day, at least every day. On that issue, we just got bipartisan legislation passed in the Senate 99-1, the largest one piece of legislation in our nation's history on any one drug crisis. That's enormously helpful in a town where, as you can imagine, nothing passes 99-1, in a politically charged town, a politically charged country. And that's very fortifying because eventually that will reach the president's desk and he will sign it. And that follows billions of dollars in new funding, $1.2 billion last week, announced by SAMHSA, which helps with mental health, as well as with the opioid crisis. $320 million yesterday by DOJ. So the resources are adding up, but with resources you must add respect.
Right.
I see that with the veterans and military things we work on. I see it with the incredible economic boom numbers, but I really see it with the drug crisis. I mean, this is no longer somebody else's kid, somebody else's community, somebody else's college campus, somebody else's coworker. The problem is seeped into every corner in our country, and so the solution must include all of us.
Congratulations on that legislation, which I know just passed the House and Senate. So I haven't heard the president's going to sign the bill, so he will sign the bill.
He will sign the bill.
He'll sign the bill. Congratulations on that. We talked about the hidden Trump voter out there, and you talked about the president being the president for all Americans. And I was talking to a friend earlier today, and he asked earnestly that in the past, every president of the United States has tried to be the president for all Americans, but it doesn't seem like President Trump is yet there, hasn't gotten there, has almost given up. And I'm wondering how would you see that frame? I know you see it differently, but how do you think we can bridge these worlds? Because the worlds, there seem to be two different Americas that sometimes don't know each other. Gravity works differently. What can we do that we're not doing to bridge these worlds so that actually the prospect of a presidency for all Americans becomes more real?
Well, some people don't want to see the success. They don't want to see him as president. They don't want any of us to be there. I mean, that's very clear. I don't know if we've ever had this many people refusing to accept an election result and see how they can help. I'm always amazed. Why not just help? And by the way, lots of folks who supported somebody else in the Republican primary, supported Secretary Clinton in the general, have helped. They've come forward and said, I want to get involved. What can I do? Here's something we were doing previously in the private sector in a different administration. We'd like to carry it forward with you. But you're asking a question that can't be answered by somebody who tries to genuinely understand people whose opinions differ from mine, and who recognizes that people may have different opinions and a different agenda than this president does, no doubt, but that we're one America. And if you can deny, you may not want to trumpet it, but if anybody in here can deny that over 7 million Americans have new bonuses or raises and counting, that the wages are the highest they've been in years, that the unemployment levels are the lowest, and everybody says, yeah. The only time we're going to cover the economy writ large is if it starts to go down, if people start to suffer. That's a terrible way of covering the economy, and it's a new way of covering the economy. We do have the lowest unemployment rate among African Americans and Hispanics, 75-year low rate among women, a lower rate among veterans, among the disabled, among teenagers. We have a boom economy, and everybody should be happy with that. We don't run around the country, Steve, saying, well, did you vote for Donald Trump? We're going to make sure that we reopen this factory depending on your politics. I don't ask that question. Nobody asks that question. The prosperity and the peace that we have here, every government, the president, the vice president, the secretaries of Homeland Security and state and the Pentagon, and everybody who's in charge of such things has to be right 100% of the time, and the terrorists have to be right 1 second of the time. And look at, thank God, the absence of the awful. I mean, thank God that is, we feel more, people do feel safer, they feel more prosperous, and the numbers bear that out. This president has received any number of, dozens and dozens of leaders to the White House, has participated abroad in dozens and dozens of other meetings with other leaders, and everybody who's surprised that he's doing what he said he was going to do didn't pay attention. he came to Washington owing nobody anything. And I think Washington, a city I love and glad to return to, particularly as a mother of 4 school-age children, that's what's different for me this tour of duty in Washington, is what I love is, I love many things about Washington, but it can be a place where inertia is the most powerful physical force, unless and until overtaken by friction and disruption, and here it is. And so I think there's some value to that, though, in that some things weren't working and some things weren't working well.
So I know you're a counselor to the president, and you present such a neat and linear and organized package of what Donald Trump is and means that seems so at odds with so much we hear. Chaos, President Trump on different positions, whether it's on immigration or issues. And sometimes people say, hey, let the Russia investigation forward to see where things hang. How do you see your role in the White House? How do people look at you in terms of helping to rationalize something that we know is somewhat chaotic because we know the boss? How do you do this? Because it's actually just a personal thing, and because I think you do a great job of doing that. But around this, in terms of the president on any number of issues of his evolving views, how do you see your role in all of that?
First of all, I disagree with that, and I've paid really close attention lately and have shared with the president that the descriptions of he's fuming and he's yelling at the TV and it's chaotic and all, people who then come to work here, no. Yeah. And he's lots of fun, and he's a great boss, particularly to the women at the White House. And those who don't want to believe that don't have to, but it doesn't change the fact that he is. Why else would I be there? Why else would I be there? If you don't have a boss who respects you and listens to your opinion and pulls together a very diverse group of people who have different ideas, they have very different ideas, a diversity of viewpoints, diversity of backgrounds. He's got people on trade who disagree, people on immigration who disagree, people on the tax cut package who disagree on any number of issues, but he listens. And he has said this publicly. He listens, that he wants that diversity of viewpoint in front of him. But he's the one who was elected to actually execute on the agenda. So somebody who recently came to work at the White House said the number one thing that he or she, I won't say who, he or she said is so different in working there, and even he or she believed that it's so chaotic, like everybody's running around screaming and all. It's actually not. In the West Wing, as those of you who have worked there or have visited, know it's a relatively small place. And so if you don't have the collaboration and cooperation and camaraderie, things wouldn't get done. And what America sees and feels may be differently than what they're told. I think in many ways, there's still that disconnect, Steve, between what Americans are told is important to them and what Americans say is important to them or feels is important to them with respect to, are you better off economically? And many Americans are. Do you feel like what we hear from people is, before I was looking for a job, it was almost like job acquisition. I was desperate to find a job. Now I feel like I have job security, but now people feel like they have job mobility. So there's 6.7 million available jobs. You've got reskilling opportunities, skills education. This president has said we need to dignify all types of careers. So you do see an explosion in manufacturing, construction, mining, many of these industries that were flatlined, if not failing, for a number of years. And that he has put an emphasis, as Vice President Pence did when he was governor of Indiana, on vocational and technical education opportunities, so that you want to graduate high school and have a skills certificate and then go support yourself basically the next day or next month as a welder, a carpenter, a mechanic, a plumber, a hairdresser. Many of the people I grew up with who have had wonderful careers and were able to support themselves without all the college and law school debt from day one.
Just real quickly, because I mean, there's so many topics I'd love talking about. Just real quick, you've been a Republican for a long time, right?
Sure.
Yeah, was that? Yeah. So this is just a small
myself
little
a
pet hobby
conservative.
thing of mine. I'm just so unused to Republicans endorsing industrial policy, because it is an industrial policy. I mean, Democrats were afraid to say the words, but President Trump has embraced it wholeheartedly. And I don't want to go deep into this, but don't you find that odd that was a major shift?
Yeah, but that's the whole, going back to the hidden Trump voter, that was a big part of it, because the president would go and see these blighted storefronts and these closed factories, and he would talk to the folks, and they would say, look, I did this job, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, or my kid, me, my father. And it's been a legacy in our family, and those jobs are gone now. And he listened very carefully to that. The reason I named them the hidden Trump voter back in July of 2016, I had just joined the campaign, but I was not yet the campaign manager, and I said the hidden Trump voter to international derision and ridicule. Thank you. That's okay, because they're there. They usually, a pollster will say, well, Steve's he's going to benefit from the hidden vote, and Steve's vote is still hidden on election day. Well hidden. This was real, because what made them hidden is not that they didn't want to come forward and admit they were going to vote for Donald Trump. It's that because they had not voted that way in a very long time, or not voted in a long time, and they just didn't look to type. If you're going to stereotype people according to their gender or their race or their socioeconomic status or their marital status or whether or not they have school-age kids at home, it's a terrible way of looking at America. And slicing and dicing us according to our immutable characteristics and our mutable characteristics, it's an okay way to try to predict the future of the electorate past this prologue, but it's increasingly a limited way of predicting, because you also make choices, what you choose to do with your spare time, with your extra money, where you choose to live. People are choosing where to live now more than ever before. And so those lifestyle choices have to be right, whether you choose to marry or not, whether you choose to have children or not. These lifestyle choices become as important as predictive modeling as your immutable characteristics. But here you had union members. You had women voting against a female candidate. You had union members. You had young people saying, I'm going to vote for this. So it wasn't time. You had people who were registered Democrats or independents, or who were Republicans but hadn't voted in a long time. And so they're no longer hidden, but they're still there. And I think people, when you say Trump's only playing to his base, that's just not true, because you can't be the president who's enacting policies that benefit so many people and say you're playing to the base. The deregulation that's benefited many people, smarter regulation, more effective regulation, getting rid of the unnecessary, duplicative, expensive, excessive regulation. We hear from business owners all across the country, I was going to close down. We were dead on our backs, and now we're expanding. The people who are reinvesting in their workforce and their workplace. And the last thing I'll say about the president is, I know people got the election wrong, but you still get him wrong, to your other question. If you just believe what you want to believe, and you believe people who have no idea, a person close to the White House, the person, I don't know, at Pete's Coffee across the street, somebody familiar with their thinking is usually the sourcing. If you're going to believe that, then you fail to see that every time the president has said, you can't do X, the world will fall apart, our faces will burn off tomorrow, you can't keep the promise of 5 presidents and move the embassy to Jerusalem and recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, as Israelis do, and he does it anyway. You can't pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. It'd be a disaster, and he does it anyway. You can't go from 35% corporate tax to 21% tax, because the corporations will stuff the money into their pockets. So many have reinvested in the workplace and the workforce and their local communities. So when you're told no, and you can't, and you won't, and how ridiculous, so many times, and you do it anyway, and you see some of the success for a lot of Americans, then it heartens you to try to do even more.
I'd love to debate this and talk for hours. So many issues you brought
We may not.
up. But I guess I want to finish. One of the themes that has come up all morning and all day, there seems to be this pining to get back to an empathy across aisles, to get back to a civility, to raise questions. And whether it was conscious or unconscious, one of the frames you brought on early on alternate facts has helped create the sense that there were 2 gravities, 2 worlds. Do you regret that framing, and do you think, in terms of healing, in terms of getting people back in the next 2 years, what kinds of positive agenda items will the Trump administration put onto, basically not have alternate facts, but bring people back into kind of a common understanding of things?
So a lot of people use that phrase for their own purposes, and that's really regrettable, because everybody knows I meant alternative information, additional facts. I've said it I don't know how many times, but people will continue to write that because they want to write that if it's the pre-narrative. I hear people on TV constantly, and I'm starting to screenshot it and take note of it, because it'll be delicious one day, constantly saying, well, 2 things can be right at the same time. And I say, really now? And they'll make an excuse for this one. Increasingly, they say it, by the way. Alternative facts just meant alternative information, additional facts, and all I meant by that, even though you may not want to cover it, is that it was about Sean Spicer the day before. I gave 39 minutes worth of 3 network Sunday show interviews that day. It was a big day. And
but how big, we don't know.
No, you should go. You should go pull and watch the whole interviews. But people don't want to do that because they really don't want me to be on TV. That's why they would say, "Don't have her on anymore." And I have standing invitations. Don't have her on anymore because they know I'm effective and they know I'm accessible and they know I can not speak with marbles in my mouth as some others do. But moving on from that, the day before they were talking about inaugural crowds, and in all 3 network interviews I made the point, I said, you know what, it's not really an exciting topic for me. I think presidents ultimately are judged by their records, and we just got here. He just got sworn in. They'll be judged by, are we more peaceful, are we more prosperous? That's usually the benchmark. But all I meant was that people are watching it on their screens. Right. People are getting the information. People just didn't all show up, but they were watching the inauguration, and somebody who ran a major sporting event recently said to me, you know, we had our largest audience ever. I said, oh. He said we had our largest audience ever recently, but we had fewer people in the stadium, or we had just as many in the stadium because you can only fit so many. But people use that for their own purposes, and they should look at the full body of my work and not reduce me to one phrase and try to pretend that they're being empathetic and they love to get back to civility and reach across the aisle. Have you seen the way people treat me? Come on, I will be known as being much more nice to people than they are to me, and I'm good with that.
Yeah,
I'm good with that.
But the point is, you've done opioids now, and you're making progress on that. You and I were talking about opportunity zones, which was a major bipartisan.
Employment.
So next 2 years, what could be on the table?
Prison reform was ignored. Pardon?
Next 2 years, what could be on the table that would be great bipartisan or successes of the administration in getting bipartisan support that really gets us to a place where, I don't know, we're seeing the world the same?
Sure. Well, again, you mentioned the drug crisis. That needs bipartisan support. I'm very happy that so many of those Democrats in the House and the Senate who don't want President Trump to get the victory voted for it because they see the need in their own communities. Opportunity zones, the president, as part of his tax package, knows that 52 million Americans live in economically distressed communities as that is defined. And so there are a number of specific initiatives going into the opportunity zones. He obviously is working with Senators Tim Scott and Senator Cory Booker the last time I checked on it. That I think Treasury is finalizing the rule, technically speaking, but that is big. You just don't hear a lot about Jared Kushner and the president and others are working on prison reform. Different than sentencing or criminal justice reform, but prison reform, that's a bipartisan issue. That passed the House with overwhelming numbers because—
Do you have Tom Cotton on your side yet?
If you've paid your debt to society, well, prison reform is different than sentencing reform, but if you paid your debt to society for nonviolent crimes, and everybody who has said you are eligible and ready for reentry, but just like with the drugs, you have to make sure that the whole of government approach is treating the whole person. And the whole person then is looking for a job, is wondering where the housing opportunities are, maybe wants to get a degree or finish a high school degree or a college degree or get a new skill set. So just, patting ourselves on the back as a country and checking the box and saying, wow, we got that person into a drug treatment or a drug court program, or we released him or her from prison. There's much more that has to go into that and will. But again, even with my blurted out revelation on Sunday, people were pointing out to me, plenty of people were very nice. Some wanted me to tell my story in my own voice, which I won't do but a lot of people weren't nice because they don't want me or someone who works with Donald Trump to have any part of humanity or humility, both of which I possess. They just don't, and you know it. Go and read it. You read it, and then you look away. But I'm not in the White House to read about myself, and I pray for those people because I have no idea what could possibly make people so negative and acerbic toward a stranger because we disagree. And they can chuckle all they want, but winning has finished a lot of sentences and solved a lot of problems.
Well, I am grateful on behalf of the Atlantic Festival that you came to spend some time with you today. So, ladies and gentlemen, Counselor to the President of the United States, Kellyanne Conway.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please welcome back the Atlantic's Margaret Lowe.
Don't go, don't go. There's more. There's something wonderful. Stay tight. Thank you, Kellyanne Conway and Steve Clemens. We covered some weighty terrain today, and I hope you leave here this afternoon feeling enriched by the people you met and the ideas you heard. Hang on. Just a sec. There's actually something very special coming up on the idea stage that I promise you don't want